As I mentioned earlier, today's program is entitled In the Black, A Coal Miner's First-Hand Accounts of Working Underground. I mentioned that this was an opportunity not only to talk about coal in Kentucky, but also to talk about oral history in Kentucky. This year we're celebrating the 40th anniversary of the Kentucky Oral History Commission. And I want to introduce one of our commission members and a former chair of the Kentucky Oral History Commission, Sharon Hackworth. So Sharon, thanks for being here, for your leadership. The Oral History Commission is administered by the Kentucky Historical Society. The Oral History Commission is the only state entity of its kind in the nation. And let me tell you a quick story. Allison, I don't know if you were in for the conference, but several years ago, we hosted the Oral History Association's annual meeting in Louisville. Sharon, you remember. And I remember being at a reception, I think at the Fraser History Museum that night. And it was so interesting, had a chance to visit with folks from around the country. And I found myself in a conversation with people from MIT and the University of Illinois. And they were hanging on every word we shared as we talked about the Oral History Commission. And it was just, I sort of puffed up in pride that, MIT was interested to hear about what we were doing. That was a nice feeling. But it was just a reminder to me how unique the Commonwealth of Kentucky's commitment to oral history is. And frankly, I think that's why Allison is here today, and we are super grateful for that. This is not typical in states or in state historical societies for there to be this 40-year commitment to oral history. And I think the Commonwealth is the better for our collective commitment to oral history. And I hope you'll take advantage of some other opportunities as the fall unfolds to connect with 40th anniversary activities. To say just a little bit more about this, the Commission is committed to statewide oral history documentation through a grant program and then outreach services. It literally reaches from one end of the Commonwealth to the other, and our goal is to record and to preserve the diverse stories that are part of Kentucky's rich and colorful history. Allison Tracy is the Oral History Administrator for KHS, and she manages the Oral History Commission. Frankly, she follows in some outstanding footsteps, and we haven't missed a beat under Allison's leadership. Some of you in Frankfort will know the name Kim Lady Smith. She was director of the Oral History Commission and then led the transition as KOHC came into the larger Historical Society umbrella. Doug Boyd, who is now at University of Kentucky, many of you will know his outstanding work, both within the Commonwealth, nationally and internationally. And then Sarah Milligan was Allison's immediate predecessor, and Sarah is a national leader in her own right. She's now on faculty at Oklahoma State University. And so you're thinking, oh my gosh, we've got this unbelievable track record. What are we going to do? Well, we were so fortunate that Allison Tracy answered the call. She is a graduate of both University of Nevada, got her undergraduate degree there, and then got her master's at Columbia. She most recently was working at Stanford University, helping to document Stanford's history through a series of stories of prominent faculty members and administrators. When she was at University of Nevada, she worked on an oral history project that looked at the history of women's athletics at the university. It actually wound up in book form, and it was entitled "We Were All Athletes: Title IX and Women's Athletics at the University of Nevada." Allison is not only an active member of the Oral History Association, she's now on their administrative board, and as I mentioned, she did her education both at Columbia and at University of Nevada. So join me in welcoming Allison to today's program. she will be interviewing Gary Bentley for an oral history project. So this is not just sort of a made-up, contrived sort of conversation. This is an actual oral history interview, and we are so pleased to have Gary with us. Gary earned his living working in Kentucky coal mines for 12 years. He says that the stories he sees in the media about miners and about mining life don't quite reflect the world that he experienced on the job. So he tells real stories through a fascinating series entitled In the Black. And that series covers everything from a miner's first day on the job, jitters, we can all relate to that, all the way to the bantering and camaraderie of those working the mines here in the Commonwealth. Some of you may be familiar with Gary's blog. It appears each Monday on the Daily Yonder. It's a website about life in the United States rural and small communities, and it's sponsored by the Center for Rural Strategy in Whitesburg, Kentucky. Today, Gary is involved in manufacturing, and he also is very involved in planning and hosting bicycle events across Kentucky and southern Indiana. And so we are tickled to have Gary with us as well. So join me in welcoming Gary to the program. And without further ado, I'll turn things over to Allison. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kent. Thank you, everyone, for coming today. I'm so happy to see all of you. And I'm happy to work with Gary and do sort of a live oral history interview for you all. As Kent mentioned, we are celebrating the 40th anniversary of the Kentucky Oral History Commission. One thing I will say is the commission actually started as a project where we sent recording equipment out to all of the county libraries. And folks at those libraries interviewed longtime residents in the different counties, and all of those interviews actually came back to KHS. So KHS is unique in being able to administer the Oral History Commission, but we also have one of the largest oral history archives in the United States, and that county collection is sort of the foundation of both its size, but also a very unique collection in terms of what's been documented. So it's certainly an honor for me to administer the commission, to work with that collection, to work at KHS, to work with Gary today. I will also plug one more thing. The commission does give grant funds to support oral history work. So if you thought you might have an oral history project that you would want to work on, or if you think you know anyone, please let them know that we do have an active grant cycle this fall. The application deadline is September 30th. I will be here after the presentation. I have lots of cards, so I'm happy to pass those out to everyone, but I just wanted to put that out there because we want to get as many applications as possible. So. Kent talked a little bit about your blog, In the Black. And I know that you're working on In the Black, and you also have done different interviews and events like this. And I wonder if you could talk, Gary, a little bit about kind of what you're hoping to sort of communicate to folks through the blog and through these events.
So the blog was created out of inspiration from a family member of mine that's an old-time musician. He was performing at UK for their Appalachian Studies class. And I went to visit him and kind of watch him play music. And afterwards, he told me that I should document my stories of a contemporary miner. He said, you hear the stories and see the photos of the guys in the early 20s and 30s as coal miners. He goes, but you never really hear about the miners from, the most recent years and, in the 90s, early 2000s. And he encouraged me to write music. However, I'm not that great of a musician. So I decided I would just document these stories, maybe put something together for a family reunion. Never expected it to end up being what it is today, but I'm very happy to share the stories and give people an idea of what it's like to be a coal miner through the eyes of a coal miner, not somebody from the outside trying to document, but telling the real life stories.
Through your experience.
Yes.
Yep. And we actually heard an interview that you had done with Erica Peterson at WFPL, and that's how we sort of became aware of you and your work. And we pitched the idea of you coming and doing Food for Thought with us, and we're really happy.
Yeah, I'm very happy to do this. Thank you all very much. Yeah, thank you. And just as kind of a little bit on oral history, we do oral histories to document historically substantive information through people's lived experience of history. So we're talking to folks about everyday experiences, we're talking to them about sort of experiences of larger historical events, and hopefully weaving those together to create not only a narrative of someone's own life, but to kind of reflect on and provide some insight into sort of history as they experienced it. So hopefully I'll accomplish that today.
today for you all. Gary and I met last week and did an initial interview, and we started with his early life history, growing up, going to school, decisions about going into mining. So we're not going to cover a lot of that today. We're going to jump in really into sort of his experiences going into mining. But I just wanted to acknowledge that's typically where we would start with an oral history, documenting someone's early life. But as I did when we met last week and for today, I will start with the question that I start every interview, which is, can you tell me a little bit about where you were born and where you grew up?
Yeah, so I was born in Whitesburg, Kentucky, which is the county seat for Letcher County. It's still a very small town, population of 1,300 people maybe. And so with that size of a community, I went to school with my graduating class from preschool all the way through our senior year of high school. So it was a very small, tight-knit community. And really, that's kind of, I think, what pushed me into coal mining, because we were never told or talked to about career options, what we should do in school. You were told you were going to be a coal miner, or you were going to go to college and be a doctor or a lawyer. There weren't a whole lot of options in Whitesburg. So yeah, it's a small town. It's very, I would say it has a different appeal than most rural communities. There's a lot of art and a lot of intellectual experiences that you can gain in that community. So it's different, but it still has the small rural town vibe to it.
Can you tell me a little bit about your parents and your family?
Yeah, so my mother, Charlotte Bentley, father's Keith Bentley, both were born and raised in Letcher County. My father was born in Whitesburg. My mother lived maybe 5 miles in a small community called Mayking. My mother lived there her entire life. She did spend maybe 2 to 3 years living in the Fort Knox area, but quickly came back home. My father followed his brothers to Detroit during the automotive boom in the 70s. I don't think he stayed very long, maybe a few years, and then came back. So heavily rooted in that county, and kind of feel like, when I left, they were both very upset, but at the same time, they understood. So yeah, they're, Letcher County, born and bred.
And tell me a little bit about your sister.
Oh, yeah, so I do have a younger sister. She was born in Whitesburg as well, has never lived outside of the area. She is currently a nurse assistant and has 2 kids and doing well, and still living in Letcher County. So.
Yeah. We talked a little bit about this before, about kind of your decision to go into coal mining, and we'll talk about that today. But I wonder if you could tell me a little bit about what you, before coal mining came onto the horizon, what you sort of imagined for yourself or what you wanted to do.
Of course, I always had the small fantasies as a child of what I was going to be. But realistically, in high school, I started taking computer courses in college during my junior year of high school. So my goal was to always go to college and pursue a career and leave the area. And then as my high school career moved along, I got involved in the local music scene and playing music with friends. I still wanted to go to college, but also wanted to pursue a career in music, whether it be an event promoter or actually being in a band and traveling and seeing the world. And then, of course, as we all know, you become an adult, you have obligations and things change. And so going into college was that first obligation that I realized I had to provide for myself to go to college. And that's how coal mining came into the picture.
How was coal mining going to help you with college?
So living in Whitesburg, I had that fine line of lower middle class income where my parents made too much money for financial aid. Me working a minimum wage job in high school, I didn't make enough money to pay for college, and I'm really not sure why I didn't think of student loans. At this point in my life, I'm glad I didn't.
Yeah.
But
I went to Columbia. I have a lot of student loans. I don't.
But at the time, I didn't realize that was an option. So I thought, okay, I need to find a job where I can pay my way through college, and then I'll be able to pursue whatever dream I have. And so I began working in the coal mines to pay my way through college. And of course, as the story goes, I never left.
Can you talk just a little bit about sort of the schedule that you maintained in terms of school and mining and that balance?
It was a schedule of work, school, and no sleep. But no, in all honesty, I would go in, it depended on what mine I was at the current time. Some mines were 12-hour shifts, some were 8-hour shifts. You were always 12, 14-hour days because of traveling to and from work, trying to shower when you got home and wash the coal dust off to go to class. So it was a lot of online classes, a lot of distance learning, and then, trying to squeeze in an occasional class. If I worked night shift, I would sign up for a semester of all morning classes. I would get off work, go directly to college. When I'd get out of class, come home, sleep ever how long I could, and then go right back to work. And then when I would be on day shift, it was get up 4 o'clock in the morning, go to work, get off work at 4 o'clock in the evening, and take night classes. So the no sleep wasn't necessarily a lie, but there was very little sleep.
Yeah. Could you actually, I had pulled some excerpts from your blog that I was hoping you would read. Could you actually read the first number one?
After 12 hours, I would get in my car and drive as far as I could. I would then sleep until it was time to go back to work again. I would spend 2 hours driving there, 12 hours at work, and 2 hours driving back. I didn't have time for a girlfriend anymore, and she had too much time for me.
That last line is such an elegant way of getting at such a fundamental problem, it seems like, in so many relationships. I really like that. How did you manage your personal relationships? I mean,
they became non-existent for a while, especially while I was trying to take college classes and work in the mines. I really had no time for anything other than work and school. If I did do anything for myself or for relationships with friends, it was what small amount of time I would have on weekends. But then being a miner, it's physical, hard labor. So a lot of my time on weekends, I wanted to rest and relax. And I had very, very little time for any type of relationships or personal time. It was all work and school.
Do you think that experience was typical of the other miners that you were working with?
No, actually, I'm the only coal miner that I worked with or knew of that was taking college classes while working underground. I'm sure there have been plenty, but I didn't know of any. Although a lot of the guys with the hours we worked and then voluntary overtime, I feel like they had very little time for family, personal things they wanted to do, because a lot of the miners I worked with, they would work 16-hour shifts 7 days a week. A lot of that was voluntary, and it was because they knew with that overtime they could afford the things they wanted, and a lot of it was mandatory at times. So when you're a coal miner, often the people you work with are your family, and that's where your personal relationships are.
A prominent element of your blog is writing about the people that you met, this family that you developed. And in reading at least how far you've gotten, one person that stands out in my mind a lot is Jake. And you actually knew Jake before you got into coal mining. I was wondering if you could tell me about him.
Yeah, so me and Jake, which of course is not his real name, we grew up together, like I said, from preschool through high school. Being in the town we lived in, we played summer leagues of baseball together. The basketball leagues were together. Of course, the small summer league of football, which was county kids, but it was all one league. So we spent, all of our lives growing up together. He was a hard kid. He was, I guess you would say he could have been a bully. He always was completely nice to me, but he was one of those kids with rougher edges, but he was also very athletic, just an amazing athlete, but he also had a family that pushed him really hard. One of the story that I mentioned in that was I remember being 7th or 8th grade, and we were playing like a middle school championship football game, and he had broken a couple of ribs. And the EMTs were like, let's take him to the hospital. And his dad refused to let the coach sit him on the bench and made him finish playing the game. And then, of course, into high school, he continued in athletics and was really good. But he went a different path than me. He got involved in a lot of the parties and kind of got taken down a different path and led him into some things that he shouldn't have been involved in. And then just a few years later, ran into him, at a coal mine and working together, and learned that he had fallen on a pretty dark path, and he was back in the coal mines to try to support his daughter and really to clean his life up.
Did you often meet people that, were trying to, use the income that they were getting from coal mining to sort of turn their lives around? Or, was that common for folks?
Yeah, that was, honestly, I think a lot of people, that was almost their gateway out of poverty or out of living at a lower income. They knew they could go into coal mining and make a good living, especially for that region. But then that also would turn them over into with financial struggles, because they would be living this life of luxury to them and living beyond their means because they'd never had that opportunity before. It's a hard subject, and it was hard for a lot of people to handle, because when you're 18 years old and you can make $75,000 a year, that's a lot of money for an 18-year-old kid to handle properly if they've not been raised by a family that knows how to handle that. But yeah, it was, and a lot of people did really well with it. They were able to, some people even started their own businesses and were able to get out of the mine. Some people went to college, went into other careers, but mining was almost an exit strategy for a lot of people.
How did you handle the income?
And not as well as I should have. I had a lot of ATVs and motorcycles, and needless to say, I paid for my college, and then realized I was making more money working underground than I was when I finished my degree. So I decided at a young age, being naive and not understanding what I was doing, I'm going to stay in the coal mining industry. This is what I'm going to do. And I dropped out of college, only to later in life think back, man, what if I would have finished that and been somewhere else?
One aspect of Jake's story was his drug use, and the drug use is a pretty prominent theme, at least so far in your blog. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what you witnessed in terms of drug use and kind of what role it played in the miners' lives.
So I'll start when I was in high school. You would always hear kids talking about smoking pot or drinking at parties. But then there was a time, and it seemed like it was instantaneous, that it went from casual, fun partying into prescription drug abuse. And I think a lot of that is not to blame on the miners, but I would say the industry itself and then the medical industry, because you had these miners that would get injured, but yet they could not miss work. They needed that income. Even though you had health insurance and you had short-term disability, that wasn't going to be enough to make ends meet every month. So then you would have these miners that would take these prescription medications just to be able to get through work the next day. And then the injury gets worse because they're continuing to work on an injury. So that means they need more medicine. And it keeps, it's just an ongoing cycle that digs them deeper and deeper. And then, so you may have these younger guys come in and they're working with somebody, and something I'd seen happen before, a guy says, man, I don't know if I can make it to the end of the shift. My arm's hurting, my back's hurting. And the guy'd say, well, here, take one of my pills. It'll make you feel better and it'll help you get through the rest of the day. And then that puts them on that cycle. And it continues and continues. When I first started underground, if you don't mind, I'll tell part of the first story. So I was scared to death. I was 18, had just graduated high school, and I was going to get on the man trip with all of the men that worked at the mine. And of course, it was like the parents and uncles of the kids I graduated high school with. And I was terrified. All these men, big burly men, and I was this little nerdy teenager that were laying on this man trip kind of like sardines squeezed into a can. And I go out and I kind of find a spot and lay down. And of course, they're all kind of picking at me and talking about how I'm too pretty to work in the coal mines. And so we start traveling underground, and the man trip stops, and all these guys get off and they start pulling prescription medication out of their lunch boxes and pockets. And in my memory, which may be a little different than how it happened, I was scared to death. I'd never seen anybody use prescription medication like this. But they started crushing these pills on top of the man trip. And it was just, it was a terrifying experience for me. And then, of course, it continued on throughout my career until early 2000s. And then the Mine Safety and Health Department really started cracking down on drug testing.
When they did start, doing more drug testing, like how often did you have to get drug tested?
It started off, initially it was, take a drug test, do a physical, you get the job, and that's the last you hear of it. When the drug use got to where it was dangerous underground, and there were times where I would even be scared at work, like, guys weren't capable of doing their jobs and being aware, and they started drug testing. It would be random drug tests, a guy would 1 week or 2 week, and then as other incidents became involved, it got to the point where sometimes I would do 3 to 4 drug tests a month. And it did clean up the mines and stopped a lot of the drug abuse underground.
Mm-hmm. There was, when we met last week, we talked a little bit about, there was a time when, as it seemed like as they were implementing some of these policies, miners could kind of bounce from mine to mine.
Yeah, so in the beginning, it was if you fail the drug test, you lose your job. But that meant the guy would go to the next mine. And especially in southeastern Kentucky, there were so many underground mines. There were your contract mines, your what I always called truck mines, which were just small mom and pop operations. And then there were your big companies. But these guys, they would just go from job to job, and eventually they would run out of mines to go to. But a lot of guys could continue that cycle for years. And then they finally implemented a law, so your first time you go in front of the board, you lose your mining license for, I don't remember exactly, I'm going to say 3 months roughly, and you have to participate and go through a drug rehabilitation program. The second time, it's extended much longer. But then the third time, you're never allowed to work underground again. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of guys knew that this was their way to provide for their families and to make a decent living in the area. And I think it really forced them to rethink what they were doing and make a change.
And there was a man, I'm wondering if I can use this name, Thurman, is that?
Yeah, that'd be fine. Yeah,
okay. Maybe I shouldn't have done that in front of an audience of like 150 people. But he was someone that seemed like he was able to sort of clean himself up and get out.
Yeah, he came to work with me probably, and I was about 4 years into my mining career. And so I had a little bit of experience, but he came in from having 12, 13 years experience. And he had an issue with prescription medication, but he had lost his job, lost his ability to see his children. And so when he came to work, he had just cleaned himself up on his own, kind of a cold turkey situation. And he told me for him coming to work every day, it was a struggle, but it forced him to look at himself and then to look at the other guys we worked with and know, I have to stay clean. I have to keep this job, essentially so he could see his kids and be with his family. But he used coal mining as almost a type of meditation or rehabilitation program because he goes, I can come to work, I can work myself into submission every day, go home and sleep, and then come back and do it again. And it doesn't allow me time to think about it or to focus on the addiction.
Mm-hmm. One thing that comes up a lot in your blog is as we've already talked about, sort of the family that you sort of create with your fellow miners and the camaraderie that you have. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about sort of the relationships that you develop and sort of how your experience has bonded you.
So initially, working underground, being very young, a lot of the older guys and a lot of the guys closer to retirement, they kind of like took me under their wing, treated me more like their son. They would really go as far as they could as to help me and to teach me the right ways. And so that creates a different kind of bond. But then you've got, so like one of my best friends that I worked with and grew up with through school and church, I saw him, I thought he was dead. I mean, I saw a rock fall, and I was the first one there. And so living through those kinds of experiences together, it really pulls people together, and it makes you reevaluate life in general. It makes you think more about the people you're working with every day. Gives you a different outlook. So I think working in those conditions with those types of risk, and knowing that, you know, you're going to spend 12 hours a day with these people 6 miles underneath the mountain, and if something is going to happen, this is who you've got to rely on. So I feel like all those circumstances combined really creates a different bond than what you would have with even a brother, sister, or a best friend, because you're in such extreme circumstances that you really have to trust one another and rely on one another. I think it just, the environment creates a totally different bond than what most people would ever understand.
How would you manage it when there was someone that you felt like you couldn't rely on?
Oh, that's a tough
Sorry.
question. No, you're fine. But no, there are many instances, and I've talked about some of these people in my stories as well. And there's the few guys that are the kind of the troublemakers, or they don't want to work with anybody. They don't want to get along, and it's kind of turmoil. They work themselves out with other people, or in the situations I've seen. A lot of times the crew of miners would take it upon themselves to let that person know that they were going to change and they were going to become part of this family and this team. And usually the person came around and changed. It was a very old-fashioned kind of outlaw way to handle a situation, but more often than not, that's how it worked underground.
I know in your blog that these stories are some of the saltier stories.
Yes.
Is there any story that you can share with our audience here today that you can think of?
Yeah, I mean, there was a situation later in my career. I was actually a foreman at the time, underground, and everybody on the crew worked together really well, really had a strong bond. My wife probably remembers me talking about how much I liked most of the guys on the crew, and even as their supervisor, we became friends. And still to this day, I talk to some of those guys. But we had one guy on the crew that just kind of didn't want to mesh, didn't want to work with everybody, and me and him had physical altercations underground. And then later on, everything just kind of smoothed over. It just kind of, and I couldn't figure out what had happened. I was like, man, this is weird. This guy's not acting like he used to, you know. I don't know what happened. I was like, me and him have had altercations, and it became physical, and he still didn't change, so this is weird. Later on, I'd learned, actually, after I'd left the mine, one of the guys told me, he goes, oh no, he goes, we waited on him out in the parking lot one day after work, and we had a long conversation with him. And needless to say, he became a much better employee after that.
Another person that comes up in your blog that was very interesting to me was actually a woman named, you call her Suze in the blog, and she had an interesting strategy for dealing with her fellow miners. Can you
Yeah. So
talk a little bit about
Suze,
that?
when I first met her, I was really taken back, didn't know how to handle the situation, didn't really even want to hear it because I was still very young and naive, and my virgin ears couldn't handle the things she was saying. But her strategy was to be more vulgar, more offensive, and more disgusting than the men on the crew. And she once told me, she goes, if you don't stand up and you're not tougher than they are, they'll run all over you, and I'm not about to have that. Mm-hmm. And if you don't mind, I'll talk a little bit about the story, mm-hmm. because it was very interesting, because my first day working with Suze, she came from another mine, and one of the men that we worked with, the entire morning, the entire day at work, they were cursing at each other, calling each other names, just, and I was like, man, how does this work? How can you work together in that kind of environment? And then on the way out, me and Suze were having a talk on the back of the man trip. Come to find out, they were best friends. Her husband had been disabled in the mines, and so she had started working as a miner in order to help their family make ends meet. And Good Game, the guy that she was having all this controversy with, would go over on the weekends, help mow grass, do work on the house for them and help out. And that was just their way of making time pass at work. And they both knew they were having fun, but yet everybody else on the crew was completely confused. And it was an interesting dynamic to learn that, they were really such close friends, and that was their way of being tough at work, was just ripping each other apart every day.
In some ways, they were keeping each other's cover.
Yeah, they were undercover agents, I guess.
Yeah. Do you have any memories of sort of strategies that you developed to kind of, keep your cover, or?
Yeah, honestly, one of the biggest things underground that, because it is a mostly male-dominated industry, there's very few women that work underground. I had much better experiences with the women I worked with than I did the men. But they love to try to make fun or pick on one another and harass one another in very ways that would be considered sexual harassment. Extreme cases. Frat boy mentality is what I call it. Mm-hmm. But so I learned that if I pretended like, oh, this is fun, I enjoy it, that they would be like, oh, well, this isn't fun. It doesn't upset the guy. He's not mad or he's not scared. And so I kind of learned, I would kind of give back what they were doing, and then they would eventually, it's like, all right, this isn't any fun anymore. So once they learned that you weren't scared or you weren't intimidated, then it ruined the fun for them. So that was my way of, being like, all right, this is my defense mode, is to pretend to enjoy it.
Much like you're doing right now. Another theme, across your blog is the danger in the coal mines. And we've already alluded to this, certainly. I wonder if you could read excerpt number 3 that on your sheet.
I came to soaking wet on the floor of the shaft, ringing in my ears. The drumming of the drill was deafening. I tried to reach over and pull the air lever to shut off the drill, but my arm wouldn't move. Something was holding me down. The pain started to settle in, pressure on my arms, ribs, and back. A piece of rock had broken loose, pinning me to the floor of the shaft. I was soaked with freezing water, my hard hat had fallen off, my earplugs had fallen out, and I couldn't move.
And this happened pretty early on in your time.
Yeah, less than a year into my mining experience.
And talk a little bit about what the job was that you were doing when this happened.
So I was working for a hard rock mining construction company, and we drilled and set up the shafts for shaft mines and also the slopes. And my job as an entry-level miner was, you have these large hydraulic hand-operated drills from the 30s. Needless to say, they weren't up on their technology yet. And it's just hard manual labor. You're just drilling and drilling and drilling. And the other guys were much more experienced than me. I'd only been there a few months. Well, they would finish their area of drilling, and they would ride the elevator out and go eat lunch and leave me to finish my drilling. And so, of course, you're in this shaft. And at that time, we were just a few hundred feet under, not too far. But the walls of the shaft weren't protected. It was just loose rock, coal, shell. So occasionally pieces of rock would fall. And I'd be drilling and a piece of small rock would fall. And of course, I would jump back and kind of run away, and everybody would laugh at me and make fun of me. So this day, I was starting to get a little better and to get caught up with the rest of the guys on the crew. And of course, they still beat me. And as they were riding the elevator up, I thought to myself, I can hurry and finish these 3 or 4 holes that I had to drill. And before they finish their lunch, I can get outside to eat really fast and be able to come back down with the rest of the crew and get to eat lunch for the first time. So here I was drilling, and I saw a couple small pieces of rock fall. And they always tell you, if you see small pieces of rock, look out, because that means something bigger is about to fall. And of course, I wanted to hurry and eat lunch with the rest of the crew for once. And I saw the little pieces of rock falling, ignored it, And when I came to, a larger piece had me pinned to the floor of the shaft. And I guess I laid there, I don't know exactly the time, but I'm going to say at least 45 minutes because they had to ride the elevator out, eat, ride the elevator down. It could have been as long as 2 hours, depending on if they had things prepped above ground. I don't know what they did or how long I was there.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a scary experience. Luckily, I came out unharmed, other than a lack of hearing for about 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
But
And you didn't, at the time, you didn't tell your parents about it?
no, I just told them I got sent home from work early, that, some stuff had happened to the mine and they didn't need me to finish out my shift. And then, of course, kind of talked about it and lied and said I was going to go to the hospital, and instead I just drove on to work, and later called my mom and said the doctors said that, I was fine, go back to work.
Why didn't you tell your parents?
Well, they didn't want me to work underground to begin with. And so I thought that if I told them a story like that they would instantly be like, no, you're going to quit, you're not going to do this. And it's still at that time, I really wanted to pursue this career in mining because the miners are romanticized in that area. It was like, especially as a small child, I'm sure many adults it's different, but as a child and teenager, everybody looked up to the coal miners. These were the hardworking men and women of Eastern Kentucky. They were the people we're proud of. I mean, Pikeville had a little small basketball team, and they called them the East Kentucky Miners. I mean, it's a very romanticized career. So, of course, that's what I wanted. I wanted people to look up to me. And so I didn't want to harm that and take any chances of my parents putting their feet down while I was still under their roof. And so, yeah, I would just lie and pretend nothing was wrong and continue and go back in.
Do you think that was common of other miners? I mean...
Yeah, I think a lot of guys, I know personally a lot of guys worked through injuries. A lot of guys would seriously get hurt underground. They would pretend they got hurt at home and come back to work. I knew a guy that broke his arm. He pretended that he was cutting grass on the side of a hill and fell and broke his arm. That way the company wouldn't get a safety hit, and therefore he could continue to go underground and work.
Mm-hmm. Was this sort of the scariest of incidents? Or, I mean, did you have other close calls while you were working underground?
There were a lot of close calls at that time. That was the scariest.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the longer I worked underground, the more common these events were, and I brushed them off and ignored it. And it got to the point where I was complacent. I could be roof bolting, and the entire entryway would collapse. I'd be like, all right. And I'd go tell the boss, clean it, and go right back to doing my job and never think twice about it. It became almost where you feel invincible. You're like, well, it's never going to happen to me. As I was talking earlier, I saw one of my friends, covered up in a rock fall, and I honestly thought he was dead when I first got to him. But even those instances, you kind of brush it off and continue going on, because in the long run, if you worry about it day in and day out, you're not going to be able to do your job.
When you look back on those experiences now, I mean, are you now sort of more sensitized to the danger? I mean, how do you feel about those experiences today?
Yeah, it goes both ways, because I'm in the manufacturing industry now. So I think back about my experiences underground, and I'm often like, man, why did I do that? That was crazy. Because, of course, like all miners, we would take shortcuts that were probably the most unsafe thing we could do in life. But we thought, oh, it'll never happen to me. I'll never get hurt. So I look back at that, and I'm thankful that I was lucky enough to come out alive. And out of all the stupid things I did on my own, I never got hurt. But then also, it's made me look at other issues in general life or at work and manufacturing where, somebody will bring up a safety concern. I'm like, well, that's not unsafe. You should have been underground with me when we did this. So I feel like now that I'm not underground, I do look back on events that happened, and I think that was really dangerous and that was crazy. I shouldn't have done it. But then there's other things in my life now where I don't even consider it a risk or a danger, and other people would be like, well, that's crazy. You can't do that. So it kind of goes both ways.
Yeah. You worked for many companies. You worked in a lot of different jobs. I mean, there's tons of
Yes.
jobs to do in a coal mine, and you worked through many of them. This is going to sound like a weird question, but I wonder, understanding that this is grueling work, I wonder if there was any job that was better or that you preferred.
I don't think there was a job that was better. As a shuttle car operator, it's a pretty safe job. There's not a lot of physical labor to that specific job. That's the thing about mining, is you're never doing one job. If you're a shuttle car operator, at lunchtime when everybody eats, you're going to have to go stack concrete block for building a bradish. But that would probably be the easiest job as far if you're looking at it from physical labor. But for me, roof bolting was my favorite job underground. It was probably the most dangerous, but it was also fast-paced. It kept you busy, and it seemed like the shifts went by longer. And I knew exactly what was going on underground. I knew what was above our heads every day. I knew, because I'd put the roof bolts up, that they were done correctly, and I didn't have to worry about a roof collapse. So a lot of it was that security of knowing I'm the one doing this job, and I know it's being done right. And I think that was a lot of the reason that I enjoyed that job.
I'm going to jump us ahead a little bit. We could certainly, we could be here for hours going through all of your stories. But I want to talk a little bit about, in your blog, you talk about a fellow miner named Lloyd, and his advice to you was find a good woman and have beautiful children. And you comment in your blog how at the time when he gave you that advice, you're like, well, that's bananas. Like, I don't understand that at all. But I wonder if you could tell me, I'm sort of trying to prompt you to tell me a little bit about your wife, and if why you eventually took Lloyd's advice.
Yes, so at that time, Lloyd was one of the guys that took me under his wing. Of course, he gave me what I thought at the time was the craziest advice anybody would ever give anyone. Why would I want to get married and have kids? I was making money and I could buy whatever I wanted. And later on in life, I learned that that's not what life is all cracked up to be. Luckily, I met my lovely wife who's sitting here today, and without her, I wouldn't be where I'm at today, especially here. As a coal miner, I always thought that was the only thing I could do. I thought, okay, I'm going to say at the time when I was first laid off, I spent 10 years underground and then ended up working 2 more. But I thought, I'm just a coal miner, that's all I'm ever going to do. So I did everything I could to further myself into that career. And then once I met my wife, she always encouraged me to look outside of that, look outside of the box, do things that you want to do. Of course, I have a beautiful stepdaughter and a beautiful daughter. But really, I'm just very happy that I met her, and she was able to encourage me to begin writing. Because I was like, I don't know how to write. I didn't go to college to be a writer. And of course, you just write, just to do it and enjoy it. It's the same with my bicycling. She often encouraged me, go out and do a ride, And so it's really about having somebody that supports you and that wants you to be happy and will do what they need to do to make sure you're happy. And that completely changed everything. And I think if I would have had that earlier in life, coal mining may not have been my career option because you didn't have time for that. As she can attest to, when I was underground mining, we spent very little time together. And I was fortunate enough she stuck around with me to see that through. And you've been together through a lot of transition in both of your lives. You were laid off from arc mining in 2012. Yes.
And that sort of set off. Talk a little bit about kind of what that set off for you.
Yeah, so unfortunately for her, luckily for me, she stayed with me. So Arch Coal laid me off in 2012. It was a massive layoff, made statewide news. They laid off over 700 employees in one day with no notice. I was one of the fortunate people being a salary foreman that I did have a severance package to rely on, but there were hundreds of employees that it was go sign up on unemployment and wait 2 weeks and you're going to get a check. It was a very tough day, a very hard day, and I was scared because at that time so many mines had laid off I felt like I did not have much of an option. I tried for months locally to find jobs, and there were some available, but none that paid the salary that I was used to. We traveled to New Mexico together to interview for a job, which I luckily did not accept. So then we moved to Western Kentucky, lived in Western Kentucky for a little over a year or so, and then we moved to Southern Indiana because she encouraged me to pursue a career in manufacturing. And luckily we were only 20 miles across the river, so it was, not far from Western Kentucky. And then she encouraged, because, my daughter lives in Eastern Kentucky, and I really wanted to be close to her, and she kept encouraging me, if you want to move back to Lexington, move somewhere closer to be with your daughter, all you have to do is try it. Just look for a job, try it. And we made I think it was a 4-year plan to move back to Lexington, and ended up being a 6-month plan because I took her advice without telling her and applied for some jobs in Lexington. And so now we're here. So she has traveled all across the state with me, and been very fortunate to have her there to help me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I wonder if we could kind of take a slightly broader view of coal mining in Kentucky. You were laid off from your job in Eastern Kentucky in 2012, and certainly, the industry in Eastern Kentucky has continued to decline.
Yes.
You've been able to move on into other jobs in another industry, but I wonder, was it difficult for you to let go of coal mining? I mean, what was that transition like emotionally?
Yeah, emotionally and personally, it was hard. I mean, I'd spent 12 years of my life dedicated to this industry. I'd worked through college to get a degree focused on mining. And so to give that up and to step into something totally new, something I'd never experienced, was scary. I was terrified. I was worried that I would get started and then I would fail, and I would be going back to coal mining, which had become unreliable, and I never knew what was going to happen. And then it transitioned into, with my experience, I was fortunate enough to move into another supervisory role in manufacturing. But then it became the fear of having to go back to mining. I would have, and honestly still, sometimes I have nightmares of working underground. Not that I'm scared to go underground, but I don't want to live that life anymore. I don't want to be concerned every day, do I still have a job? Is there going to be work today, or are we going to be laid off? So now it's transitioned from being scared to leave to being scared to ever have to go back.
Mm-hmm. Certainly this is a huge topic in Kentucky. The discussion about the coal industry, what's happening with the coal industry. A lot of people would say that it's kind of on a permanent decline, that it won't come back. And I wonder, what, if anything, about thinking about the relationship between the industry and Eastern Kentucky. It seems like a lot of people aren't quite there yet to let go of mining. What kind of programs or progress, or what do you think needs to happen to sort of move that forward?
Well, Eastern Kentucky, specifically southeastern Kentucky, and the region I'm from, is in an unfortunate situation that manufacturing cannot just replace the jobs in coal, because there is not the transportation available for the distribution of goods and products. But they're fortunate in the situation that they have a diverse workforce that's readily available. They have an intelligent group of people that has the ability to kind of make ends meet. Our mechanics and electricians, they weren't just a mechanic or just an electrician underground. They were a metal fabricator, an engineer. If something broke down underground, they had to find what parts they could find and then make it work. So these people have the ability and the skill and the knowledge, and it's trying to find what would actually work. I know there's a lot of initiatives, there's a lot of programs going on. SOAR is one of the big ones. The Reclaim Act is another big one to help the region out. But it's really trying to find that industry and that new diverse economy that's going to be sustainable, it's going to be long lasting, and that's going to provide these people with jobs that are going to be there. it's all economics. It's all basic economics. Market prices go up, business is good, prices go down, market is bad. So honestly, I would like to see something aside from another manufacturing, another use of those types of resources, because those markets fluctuate. I'd like to see something that's more sustainable on the long term, that my family and my friends that are still there have something to rely on, something that their kids can rely on and to move forward, whether that be through tourism, through, I'm going to say coding, technology-based industries. Honestly, I don't care what it is, as long as it's reliable, sustainable, and will allow the people there to provide for themselves like they should be able to.
Mm-hmm. One last question, and then we'll turn it over to folks for their questions. I just wonder, in thinking about, we've talked about you managing your schedule. I wonder, with everything that you have, in your life today, how are you managing things today?
In my opinion, I manage it very well. Bicycling is the number one priority. If you ask my wife, she would say different. But no, I am fortunate that I have a job that has a very good work schedule. I have a lot of time off to spend with family, friends, and for my personal enjoyment. I get to see my daughter more than I have in the last 3 years of living, outside of Eastern Kentucky. I get to spend a lot of time with my wife when she's not performing in Shakespeare in the Park. But keeping her schedule is the hard part. But no, I have a lot more free time now. Mm-hmm. My job allows me to continue to maintain my energy. I don't come home from work so drained and tired that I don't feel like I can function now. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that I'm getting to enjoy life and make the most of it now, and I'm very, very happy for that, and very happy to have the opportunity to write these stories and share these stories with people and to talk about my experiences of underground mining, because I feel like it is a very interesting atmosphere and type of life to live, and I enjoy making people laugh and telling the true stories, even though sometimes they can be a little, as you said, salty.
Yep.
But I think it makes for a good, interesting conversation.
Yeah, and I will say that in terms of where you're at in your blog, you're sort of moving through experiences chronologically. So, I imagine that the blog can continue for quite some time.
Yes, I'm not sure how long the blog will continue. I think I'm on 17 or 18 now. I've almost lost count, and I'm only maybe 3 to 4 years into my career, so it could be a very long run if at some point they don't tell me to stop.
Okay.
So.
Well, thank you, Gary. And I wonder if anyone in the audience has any questions or anything I haven't brought up that they want to.
In terms of, when did the change happen in terms of testing for drug abuse? What year?
I want to say it was around 2003, 2004. I could be wrong on that.
This was kind of the same time that the whole Oxycontin thing was happening.
Exactly. It was when it truly became an epidemic that was being looked at from the entire country. And it had gotten bad. There were guys I would be working with operating heavy equipment that would pass out on the job in the middle of operating equipment. And it was a scary time, and luckily it was handled appropriately and correctly and very quick.
We've got a question back there.
Yes, this isn't a poll question, but before I retired, I was working up in Ohio, and I heard reports that Whitesburg was doing some very progressive things among the young people, combining the traditional mountain music with rap music. Are you familiar with any of that? You would have been of the age.
Yeah, so Whitesburg is very interesting, and really it all goes back, for me, would be Apple Shop, which is an organization there in Whitesburg. I grew up kind of hanging out at the Apple Shop and going to concerts, and so then in my teenage years, we kind of created this punk rock music scene for local bands and artists. And then what you're talking about, was actually started through the program called Holler to the Hood, and now it's called Calls from Home. It's a prison outreach program that's based around hip-hop music, but also it allows family members to contact people who are incarcerated at, I think, Red Onion State Prison, and I'm not sure on the others, the other name of the prison. But so through that, they started combining the traditional old-time music and hip-hop to create this form of music they called hill hop. And they did a small concert series. There was a TV series, Justified, that actually used one of the songs as essentially a theme song for the TV show. So Whitesburg has a very, very interesting culture in that area for music, art. Yeah, it's actually a very good place. If you're going to live in rural America, I would recommend Whitesburg. Yes.
Question right here.
Did you ever work in strip mining?
My father worked in strip mining my entire life. By first, maybe 3 months out of high school, I went to work with him and was being trained to operate heavy equipment. I quickly realized I could not work with my father, so I made the choice to go underground. So I have very little experience on surface mining, but my father did work in that. So. Oh, yes.
Do you have any plans to turn your blog into a book?
You know, I get asked that quite often. Personally, I would love to. I hope that at some point there's an opportunity for me to take all of these small short stories and essentially either write a narrative of my life as a miner or do a collection of memoirs. There's no plans in the immediate future, but I hope eventually at some point I'll get to do that. Yes?
There are folks that say that the decline in the loss of jobs, the decline in the coal industry is a function of too much regulation, and there are people that say that it's a function of natural gas is cheaper and easier to get to.
Yeah.
What's your opinion, and can you speak for Whitesburg?
Yeah, well, I don't know if I want to speak for Whitesburg. But no, I'll give you my opinion, and from my experiences, because working as a foreman, I kind of had to handle some of those situations and see those numbers. I honestly feel like regulations are a bit of a scapegoat because the majority of these regulations have been there for many years. I won't say that we did a great job of following those regulations. But it boils down to market. I mean, I looked at the numbers just the other day, and when solar energy is cheaper than coal, it's kind of, I mean, to me, it's almost ridiculous. It's like, I never realized that our technology would get to that point. That's not to say I like it, and that I'm happy to see that because that means less jobs in the industry. But I mean, it's an unfortunate truth. It's a hard pill to swallow for these people. People in my family and generations past have relied on the coal industry for over 100 years. That's the only thing they knew, and that's the only thing that was ever offered to them to make a decent living. So when that goes away, people are scared, and you know they'll do anything they can to save it. So yeah, I hope something turns around, but I honestly don't see it being coal, at least not anytime soon.
We've got a question way in the back.
I was wondering how you would feel if either your daughter or your stepdaughter decided to be a miner.
Oh, wow, that's a tough one. I'll just be honest, I'd tell them no. Yeah, and it's not that I don't think they couldn't do it. It's not that I don't think that women could be a miner, because the women I worked with, for the most part, were the best miners I worked with. But I don't want my daughter to go through the same situations I went through. I wouldn't want either one of them to have to worry about their life on a day-to-day basis just because of the field of work they'd chosen. So I would definitely say no to both of them.
Well,
Oh, okay.
What about health concerns? Do you have any kind of lung?
I've not had any issues. I've also never been tested. So I don't think that I was very fortunate to work in a very modern, contemporary industry where safety regulations were taken seriously. The dust was, we didn't have a issue with respirable dust as people did years past. I feel like that in my time spent in the mines I worked at, I was fortunate enough that I don't have to worry about that, but I've also never been tested, so I don't know. But no, I think that my time spent in the mines was okay, and it was pretty safe for the most part.
all right, one more question.
There's no question that unions were very important to the industry, or at least in the beginning. Are they still as important today?
That's an unfortunate thing. That's a hot topic right now due to the companies filing bankruptcy. I was fortunate enough that the union wars, and especially in the 70s when they were fighting for the miners' rights and wages, that when I came into the mining, it was already set up. There was, so the union played a huge role in the history of mining. When I started mining, there were very few unions left in the industry. I know in Western Kentucky, there were still a few union mines, and I don't know if any are still open right now, but there were when I was working out there. And it's just unfortunately now, without getting into politics too much, that these companies are being allowed to file bankruptcy and not being held accountable to hold up to the rights for the retired workers. That's, and I don't know what power, what opportunities the unions have to fight that, but that's something I've seen in the recent news that's bothered me.
There's not a union mine left in Kentucky.
There's not anymore? Okay. I guess Patriot would have been the last one.
I don't know about that.
Yeah.
Well, I am, Gary and I will still be here after we wrap up today if you all have any other questions. Gary did bring some equipment with him over here, so if you want to come and check that out, I encourage you to do so. But to wrap up today, I will ask you how I end every interview, which is there anything I haven't asked you about that you would like to include?
Oh, wow. I don't know. Right now, my head's all, I'm thinking about 100 different things.
Yep. Then I've done my job.
I would like to thank everybody for coming out and listening to me. For those of you that have read the blog, I appreciate it. And hopefully I've been able to keep your interest and you've enjoyed reading the pieces I've shared. And if you haven't had a chance to read it, it's just go to thedailyyonder.com, and every Monday they'll pop up on the front page. Or you can search for In the Black, which is the series title. And just want to thank everybody for taking the time to listen to us talk today, and very happy I could share some of my experiences with you.
Thank you, Gary. And one last thing before we end, I just want to remind everyone to join us for our next Food for Thought. It's September 21st. The title is Shreds of History Hung on a Horn, and Mel Hankla is going to talk about Francis Tamzel and the different horns that he collected. So I encourage you all to join us then. And thank you all for coming.